of life. We'll give you maybe, a year or 18 months of benefits, but then you have to go out and become economically self-sufficient. Now, it's important for your listeners to understand that those reforms in the welfare system that actually worked incredibly well. We saw a 50% reduction in welfare caseloads after we put those reforms into being because people actually did go out and find a job, and that's the ticket to prosperity. All of those reforms were eviscerated by President Obama in 2009. So we don't have work requirements. We don't have term limits, time limits on these things. And that is, I think, been for the worse, not just for the taxpayer, but for the people who become dependent on welfare.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Stephen Moore, and he has an example in his commentary for those of you in the state of North Carolina, what happened there, and also for some of you others to maybe learn a little bit more about what is happening in some of the states. By the way, some great material in this new book, An Inquiry in the Nature and Causes of Wealth of the States. We'll also talk about that in just a minute, but let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about this idea of welfare and work. And because we have eviscerated many of the work requirements, what has that done? And if you extend the welfare benefits longer, what does that do? And what happens when some states, like North Carolina, have brought about some of those changes? So we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Stephen Moore. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
You know, as we draw nearer to Christmas, I thought it might be good to reflect on the hymn, O Holy Night by John Dwight. O Holy Night, the stars are shining brightly. It is the night of the dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. Jesus came into the world to save us, and so we feel valuable and our souls feel its worth. Perhaps the most quoted verse in the Bible is John 3:16. It tells us that Jesus came because God so loved the world. He came so that our souls would feel their worth to God. This hymn also asks us to consider the fact that the King of Kings was born as a human infant and placed in a manger. He also experienced temptation and persecution. Ultimately, he died a horrible death on the cross. The King of Kings lay thus in lowly manger, in all our trials born to be our friend. He knows our need, to our weakness is no stranger. Behold your King, before him lowly bend. Isn't it amazing that there were some who were willing to worship him even while he was merely a babe in a manger? This hymn talks about how we should respond to one another in humility. Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. We no longer have slavery in this country, but many people are still enslaved to various forms of sin and need Jesus as their Savior. And we as believers are to model the humility that Jesus demonstrated when he stepped out of eternity into time and gave up his rights as God. This is a message we need not only at Christmas, but every day. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Stephen Moore with us, again, senior fellow with the Heritage Foundation, formerly with the Wall Street Journal, author of a number of books. We've mentioned some, and we have information about this newest book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Let me also commend to you the earlier book that he also co-authored with Arthur Laffer and others, The End of Prosperity, How Higher Taxes Will Doom the Economy If We Let It Happen. Again, it was something that was warning us about what is taking place, but if you want to look at it on the national level, End of Prosperity, if you want to look at what's happening in the States, which we'll talk about in just a minute, that new book, Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States. Of course, it's very similar to the title, The Wealth of Nations. But, Stephen, let me come back to this idea of work. That is that at one time, especially in 1996, Bill Clinton and, of course, the Republican Congress put together an agreement, which at the time there was all sorts of hue and cry and doom and gloom that this is going to, hurt people. But actually we saw that the number of people on welfare was cut essentially by half. And it makes sense because if you extend welfare benefits and don't ask people to work, well, you're going to get more of idleness and more individuals that will not be looking for a job. If you require them to look for work or get work and get work skills, you actually get people off the welfare rolls. And that, I think, should be the ultimate goal of a welfare program, don't you think?
I do. And by the way, the most important thing about that experiment that lasted 10 years was not so much that we saved money, and it was not so much that people moved off welfare rolls, is what happened to those folks. And we have some good evidence that the vast majority of them got jobs, and the majority of those people who got jobs, after 2 and 5 and 10 years, guess what happened to their incomes? They went up.
That's right.
If you have a job and you're, proficient in what you do and you show up for work on time and you've got a good attitude, you can move up. Now, that's an important point because that's what we want, right? We want to give people meaning in their life, and we want to give them a chance, and we want them to become part of the middle class and not trapped in the kind of culture of dependency that leads to, all sorts of social problems in a lot of these areas. And why don't we do that again? Why don't we try to find jobs for these folks? There are jobs out there. I know we have an unemployment problem in this country, but if you give people the skills and you've got somebody who wants to work hard, we can find jobs for these folks, but we're not going to find jobs for them if we're providing them a substitute for working, which is welfare.
Well, it certainly is the case. And as you point out later in the commentary, which again we have posted because we really want people to read it, half of the households in the bottom 20% have no one in the family working. Well, there's a good example of the poverty trap. If you are not working, you are not going to have upward mobility, right?
That is a key point. So let's say that. I want to say that again because it's so important. So when you talk about families that are in poverty, and we want to eliminate poverty in America, half of those households don't have anyone working. Now, if there's no one working, you can't see your income rise unless you're living off of taxpayers. So that's where we have to really regenerate the work ethic. And I want to, if we have time, really get into the flip side of this, which is the other problem we have, is that our education system is not preparing Americans for the jobs that are out there.
Well, let's talk about that for just a minute, because we've talked about this, this kind of outcome-based education and those kinds of things, almost like you're training the worker bees or the drones. But we really need to train young people, especially, to be equipped for an information society, a high-tech society. Talk about that for just a minute, because that's another problem, and that comes in the educational system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the second hour, but while I have you, let's talk about that.
It's a total dysfunction and a complete failure of our education system, the K through 12 system, and I would argue the university system. We are graduating kids from high school and college that are functionally unskilled. They can't do anything of value. Now, I'll just give you one example. When I was in high school, we had shop. We would learn to do mechanical things, how to put things together, and so on. A lot of kids are graduating from high school have no idea how to do anything. And so you go to an employer, if you don't know how to do anything, you're not really very valuable to that employer. I'll give you another example. I talked to one of the top people who is hiring. He runs a big employment agency and hires about 500,000 people a year for businesses. He says, look, we get all these kids who are 22 years old, they're $100,000 in debt, they got a degree in political science or psychology, and nobody wants them. They have skills that are completely irrelevant to the modern-day workforce. That's a failure of our education system to get our young people ready for the job.
Well, we have some listeners in North Carolina. Of course, everyone is listening in right now. North Carolina decided to do some things and change the direction. And just as you had back in 1996 with all sorts of people warning about how this is going to harm the poor and everything, North Carolina provides, I think, one state's example of what you can do to get to the point where we no longer have welfare replacing work. How did that take place?
This was an amazing kind of experiment that happened in North Carolina where they decided they weren't going to continue to extend unemployment benefits, because what happened in 2009 and 10 and 11 is that you could get in most states up to 2 years of benefits. So it was a big problem that you could basically get, not have to work for 2 years before you had to get a job. What they did in North Carolina is they went back to the old, I forget exactly how many months, 6 to 9 months of benefits, and then they would cut off the benefits. And what they found, and by the way, you're right, it was, all the liberals said, oh, this is so cruel, and people are going to starve in the streets, and you're going to take, food out of the mouths of babies and so on. And what they found, actually, was that the unemployment rate fell fairly significantly, more than just about any other state when they did this, because guess what? When people's unemployment benefits ran out, guess what they did? They went out and got a job.
Pretty interesting. I want to get into a couple more of the areas of research that I think certainly support this idea, but let's take some phone calls along the way. Ed, listening on KNLB in Arizona, what would you like to share with our audience today?
Well, it's just interesting to me, sir, that years ago, when I was a young'un, I'm 68 years old, there was a record album that came out, and this two gentlemen were talking amongst themselves, and they found out that the federal government would pay them money to open up a business not raising hogs. So they went into the not raising hog business. And that is what has happened to society. We're all going into the not raising hog business. We're going into the not working for a living business. I draw Social Security now, but I worked all of my life and paid into a fund that would pay me back whenever I was no longer able to work. Right. And I praise God for that. But it just seems to me like, there was a black economist back in the 60s or 70s that did a study on welfare, and he determined that if you did away with all of the bureaucracy, the investigators to check for welfare fraud, their bosses, and did away with all of that, that there would be enough money back in the 70s to issue a check to every family in the United States in excess of $30,000 per year.
Yeah. Let me come to you real quickly because I'm getting close to our next break. But, Stephen, a good example, we have the business of not working business. And, again, we spend approximately $1 trillion, according to the Congressional Research Report, on welfare. And a lot of that just simply goes to various bureaucrats that live in Washington, D.C. or all over the country in various state agencies. And it is a very inefficient system. And as you've just pointed out, it's also one that does not encourage people to work where they can get value and a sense of dignity from that work that they perform.
Yeah, we've created a $1 trillion welfare industry. So a lot of that money that we spend on welfare doesn't even go into the hands of the poor people. It gets intercepted by a big, vast bureaucracy of lobbyists and welfare agencies and so on. Now, I want to get back to this point this gentleman just raised because I want to clarify something. I'm not, and I think he understands this, but for others, I want to make this clear. I'm not talking about Social Security or Medicare here. Those are programs that people paid into. Those are not welfare programs. Those are programs that people contributed to, and that was the deal. You contributed to it, and you get the. I'm talking about the welfare benefits that people get where they didn't pay anything into the system.
Right. I think we get that. And let's take a break. We'll come back, continue our conversation with Stephen Moore. And again, just encourage you to visit our website. First of all, you're going to find some great material there, including this particular article. We'll maybe pull one or two more principles out that. We also have an opportunity for you to find out more about the newest book out that Arthur Laffer and Stephen Moore and others have written, and the previous book, The End of Prosperity, are both resources I would certainly want to put in your hands. Also want to give you 4 more facts and figures, because I think it is really important if you are writing a letter to the editor, maybe putting up a Facebook post or something like that, to have some of these points to really start and stimulate and maybe even continue a conversation. So please feel free to visit our website today, pointofview.net. We also have a link, of course, to the Heritage Foundation, and certainly want to encourage you to join up with them as well. But let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some more phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Talk about what can and should be done to reform the welfare system in America. We're all about a hand up, just not a handout. We'll be right back.
Today we talk about the low information voter. With ignorance, freedom can die in a single generation. Point of View is committed to do all we can to make sure it won't be this generation, but we can't do it alone. People like you have to stop for a moment and help. One listener, who definitely lives in a different zip code from mine, has donated $10,000 to Point of View that we need you to help match before the end of the year. What can you do to help? Now notice I didn't say can you help, but what can you do? This is your final opportunity in 2014 to give. Do you believe we need to be informed to keep freedom alive? Then please help us match this gift before year end. Any gift will be doubled, resulting in twice the impact. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Give something right now. Thank you. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Stephen Moore with us. Again, senior fellow with the Heritage Foundation and also a previous writer for the Wall Street Journal, author of a number of books, including one that we're talking about right now that we'll get into in just a minute, as well as the column for Many Americans, Welfare Has Replaced Work. Just before I take another phone call, I think, Stephen, some might say, well, if we require work, there aren't a whole lot of jobs, but you point out, even in the piece that you wrote a while back, that there are tens of thousands of trucking jobs which the industry can't find workers for. So, first of all, there are some of those out there, but I think there's another issue, and that is, and I'm going to be real controversial here, the issue of minimum wage. I mean, when I first started working at the age of 18, I'll tell you what, if I were starting now, I'm not sure anybody'd hire me because I'm not sure at 18 I was worth $10 an hour. But I learned some skills very quickly in a machine shop and other things and began to show and demonstrate that I could show up on time and I was a good worker, and thus I was more employable. But when we have a higher minimum wage that increases all the time, I think it hurts, if nothing else, teenagers, minorities, the poor. What are your thoughts about that?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've said the same thing. You know, I think most people listening to this show probably feel the same way. That first of all, your first job usually is a minimum wage job. I worked at the age of 17 as in a warehouse after school, and you learn a lot on your first job. You learn basic, as you said, very basic work skills: how to show up on time, how to run a cash register, just how to be an employable person. You learn some valuable skills. Why do we want to get rid of those jobs? It's important. By the way, there's a new study that just came out at the University of Michigan that shows that when teenagers work, as long as they don't work too many hours and it distracts from their schooling, that it's actually very productive for them and they do better in life and they get better grades. So, encouraging more young people to work is an important thing. But I think the bigger problem in terms of the employment situation is, it gets back to what we were talking about before. We've got to make sure that, let me put it like this. If you're 18 years old and you graduate from high school, and there's so much pressure to go to college, and look, I went to college, a lot of people listening to the show did, if not most, but, college is not the only alternative, and for a lot of people, it might not be the best thing to do. I mean, if you go to a junior college and have an apprenticeship program and learn some kind of a useful mechanical skill or something, or carpentry or being an electrician, those are jobs that now pay $70,000, $80,000 a year. And you can get a job in an instant if you have those skills.
Yeah, we've talked about that with Tom Pauken on this program, who used to be in the Reagan administration's work with the Texas Workforce Commission and others. But let's take another phone call. Since we mentioned North Carolina, let's go to North Carolina. Glenn, listening in North Carolina on WGNN. Glenn, what would you like to share with us?
Oh, thank you for having me, Kirby. Merry Christmas to you and your host. I appreciate your show. But I have two comments, and I'm glad he brought that last section up about the truck driver. I got out of the Marine Corps in 78, and I spent 3 years over the road driving over 1 million miles. And if you don't like being away from your family and your home, that's a tough job, and it doesn't pay a whole lot more than it did in 1978. So, and then you got a target on your back by every federal and state agency that wants to take a clip at you to hit you $100, $150, $200 for a ticket. So that's why young people aren't going into it. But more importantly, on the unemployment side, my wife is a nurse, and she deals with labor and delivery. And she's had people in their mid-30s spitting out their 8th or 9th or 10th child, and they'll tell her right to her face. It's because they make money off the deal. And their grandmother or their mother takes care of the babies, and then they can pay them a babysitting fee, and that all comes out from the unemployment also. But thirdly, I went to Social Security the other day with my grandson to help him get his Social Security card straightened out because they had their own name on it. I'm 57 years old, and everybody there was under 40 trying to get something for free. So, I think everybody ought to have to work after so long. I mean, I've only taken unemployment once in 40 years of labor. So back to you, sir. Thank you.
Well, you got some good points there.
Did he say that he's driven over 1 million miles?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Wow, what a hero. Well, that's what it's about, is working hard, and this gentleman's right. Look, being a trucker is a hard job. You work long hours, you're away from your family, and what we found was that a lot of people, when the recession hit, A lot of truckers lost their job as the economy sank into recession. And then a lot of truckers, when I talked to the American Truckers Association a couple of years ago, I asked them, what's your biggest problem? They said, we're having a hard time finding drivers, because a lot of the drivers who lost their job during the recession would not go back until they ran out of their benefits, because, it is a tough job being a million miles. That's amazing. How many years this gentleman must have put into that job. And look, we need people who want to work hard. We want to reinstill the work ethic in this country. And a good paying job is still the best welfare program there is.
But as we pointed out, and I'll again quote from the Cato study that came out a while back, in 11 states, welfare pays more than the average pre-tax first-year wage for a teacher. In 39 states, it pays more than the starting wage for a secretary. And in the 3 most generous states, a person on welfare can take home more money than an entry-level computer programmer. Now, again, people make economic decisions, and some people make stupid economic decisions, but a lot of people weigh the cost and benefit. And when you have tremendous benefits given to people, these tend to be primarily in the blue states, but not exclusively, but in some of these states, in the Northeast and the Northwest and the West, and they begin to say, I could stay home and do just about as well as if I went out and was a secretary or a teacher. Maybe I don't think it's that worthwhile to go out and get a job. We've got a system right now that is rewarding idleness and welfare rather than rewarding entrepreneurship and thrift and job creation. Don't you think?
Yeah, and it doesn't work for anyone. I mean, it's not good for the people on welfare. I mean, welfare is this is another point I want to make that I think is so important. This idea that they're dead-end jobs and some jobs nobody wants to do and so on, run jobs. There is dignity in work. It's that simple. Anytime I see someone working, whether it's somebody cleaning the bathrooms in the airport, I give them a little $2 tip or something like that, because there is dignity in work, and people are working hard. And it's not fair when somebody goes on welfare, and then the person who is working, struggling, maybe working 40 or 50 hours a week to build a better life for themselves, has to pay taxes for the person who isn't working.
Yes. I wanted to get into California in particular, especially since some of that's in your book. So let's go to one of our callers in California next, KLMB. Kathy, thank you for calling today.
Yeah, I did have a...
Go ahead.
I did have a call. I did have a question. I did go to culinary art school, and I did have a job where I was paying $15, and then I went up to $17.75 an hour. Then what I got stuck with is that I got put out of work, and so I went around trying desperately to find a job, which then I ran out of my savings. My checking account got overdrawn. My 401k went out in taxes. Then I got stuck with the job that gave me $8 an hour in very few hours. If I'm lucky. If, like this one job, if I was lucky, I was working 3 hours, 3.15, 3.30, 3.75, and only 2 or 3 times I ever got hours that went from 6 to 8 hours. One day I had an 8-hour day. How do you make a living that way?
Good point. I wanted to talk about her situation, but broaden it to the state of California, because in your book, you point out the fact that when you are in the state of California, and we can pick other states, first of all, you've got a very arresting chart on the number of people that migrated to California in its heyday when it was sort of the golden state, and now all the people migrating from it. And there are some good reasons for that. First of all, a very high state income tax. Second of all, regulatory burdens and those kinds of things. I suspect if Kathy moved to state of Texas or some of these other states that do not have some of those regulatory burdens and some of the issues of the state income tax, she might be able to find a better job. But what are your thoughts about what's happening in some of these states right now?
Well, I appreciate the woman's call, and I wish her the best. I hope you find something, and I hope you find a job that pays you a good salary that you can make a living on. I know you're fighting to do that. I think this is a big problem. We're seeing, so many of the jobs now that are migrating to states like Texas and Tennessee and a lot of the southern states that don't have necessarily, high minimum wages or, union requirements for getting a job or high tax rates on businesses. There's no saying that, to get a job, you have to have an employer, right? And one of the problems, we treat employers like they're villains now. Somehow it's become, mendacious if you get rich in this country. And, when Hillary Clinton says that businesses don't create jobs, I mean, we need to understand, we need to nurture the workers, but also we have to reward the employers as well, because it takes two to create a job.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the book and take another phone call or two. Lots of things to cover today. And again, if you would like to educate yourself on some of these social policy issues and economic policy issues, that's one of the reasons we're doing this program today. We've got a number of articles that you can read. We encourage you to read them and maybe post them on your Facebook page and start a conversation. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Stephen Moore for just a few more minutes, co-author of the book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States. And Stephen, one of the things that our listeners have heard from me many times before is that if you look at those states that do not have a state income tax, and we're talking about Texas and Tennessee and Florida and South Dakota and Washington and other places like that, you see a dramatic difference in terms of their economic growth. But one of the things that I thought was so helpful about your book is you tell the story of the 11 states that adopted a state income tax, because back in 1960, there were actually 19 states that where earned income was not taxed. And you begin to follow along the stories. And again, we have listeners in places like New Jersey and Ohio and Rhode Island and Maine and Illinois and other places. And I think it illustrates not only the point that I've tried to make about the difference between those which have income tax and those that don't, but what happened to those states that actually decided to have a state income tax? Because at the time, we were told that taxes aren't going to have any big impact. What did you actually find in terms of your research?
So those 11 states, you're right, New Jersey is one of them. My home state of Illinois is another. Every one of the 11 states that adopted an income tax now has a smaller percentage of the population in its state relative to the national average and a smaller GDP. It produces less than the average state. So its population fell and its GDP fell relative to the rest of the country. Income taxes are taxes on work and effort and saving and entrepreneurship. Let me make a point because I think this is important. I was in a debate with a liberal friend of mine recently, and he was saying, we have to increase taxes on cigarettes because we want people to smoke less. Okay. I said, okay, I'll accept that. So you're saying if increase tax on smoking, people will smoke less. And then I kind of flummoxed him because I said, well, then if you tax people on their work, does that mean that they'll work less? And he didn't have quite a response to that one. But the obvious answer is yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm a simple man, and I just say that if you want more of something, subsidize it. If you want less of something, tax it. And, those states that tax things, reduce it. And we're talking about subsidizing people with welfare. And we have record levels of people on the welfare rolls and disability. And you can see that in certain states like California and others. So I think the book is a great resource for our listeners. Even though this is a national program, I really want to empower people that are dealing with issues in their state legislature. And this book, you and Arthur Laffer and others have put together, really kind of makes the case. And then the last part of the book, you really answer those kinds of questions, the criticisms that you've been receiving even since you published your book, The End of Prosperity. So talk about that for just a minute. I'll take another phone call.
Thank you for your kind comments about it. I'll just use just one quick example. You touched on this, the California versus Texas example. In the last 10 years, California, which, by the way, is an unbelievably beautiful state. It has the most incredible resources, sunshine every day, 75 degrees, beautiful mountains and beaches. And yet 1.5 million more Americans left California than went into California because the policies are all wrong. By the way, over that same time period, 1 million Americans moved to Texas. And people don't move from California to Texas for the weather.
Well said. And again, there's some great resources here, so let me just commend these books to you. We also have the column. Let's take at least one more phone call before we run out of time here, and I apologize, we might not get to all of your phone calls in the first hour. We'll continue looking at poverty in a little different area the second hour if you want to stay tuned. So let's go to, in this case, South Carolina. Deborah, what would you like to share with us?
Hi, how you doing today? And Merry Christmas to y'all.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you. I'm talking about the system, the welfare. It's the government that make the people the way that they are. Okay, in other countries, they don't have all of this. Okay, like babies. Women are popping out babies left and right. They're even in my family. Okay, people in my family. Okay, a baby a year. Okay, they do that so that they could get a check. And get a big check. The more kids you have, the more money you have.
Good point. I just want to give you enough time to respond because, again, we have a system that I think essentially ever since Lyndon Johnson chased the husbands out of the home, rewarded having children. We, again, want to provide for children, want to provide for families, but we have a system that I think needs reform. And right now, this president's actually gone in the wrong direction by taking out some of the work requirements. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's just a tragic story that this woman is telling us about because, it's very clear from the evidence. I mean, if you do 3 things in your life, for those who are young listening to this show, number one, if you graduate from high school and not do drugs, I'll include those as one thing. Number 2, if you get married. And number 3, if you wait till you're married, till you have children, your chances of being in poverty are very low. So when we pay young women to have children out of wedlock, it is a tragedy for the children, but it's also a tragedy for the women themselves. What kind of future are they going to face if they have young babies, they don't have skills, and they don't have a husband and a father in the home?
Well, again, I think you can recognize that those are three very important principles, and we've heard about those before from, of all things, an individual that actually worked in the Clinton administration. So, again, sometimes people see this as left, right, Republican, Democrat. There are people even on both sides of the aisle that recognize that we have a welfare system that is not working, and certainly you have articulated that.
One of the things my buddy Larry Kudlow from CNBC says all the time, and it's so true, maybe the last thought of the day for me, is, marriage is one of the best welfare programs there is, one of the most important economic programs there is, because people who are in married households, they tend to not be in poverty, and they tend to make it, whereas, broken homes it's just a lot tougher.
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the second hour. So we couldn't have had a better segue. We'll have Chuck Bentley, and he's written...
Merry Christmas, Louis. Thank you so much for having me on your show, and let's do it again soon.
Let's do it again. Stephen Moore, thank you so very much. Again, let me mention some of the books: The End of Prosperity, also How Higher Taxes Will Doom the Economy, also An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States. And as I just mentioned a minute ago, Chuck Bentley, who is with Crown Financial Ministries, has written a very good piece, 4 Steps to End Poverty. That's one of the steps. Obviously, one of the best anti-poverty programs is a thing called marriage, especially traditional marriage. And he just listed, and I will again post some of that on our website. I've done a commentary in the past in which they have actually found, William Galton has found, that if you do those 3 things, your chances of going into poverty are much lower. We'll get into that in the second hour, because we recognize that poverty and even welfare reform is partially an economic issue, and we spent an entire hour here with one of the best economists to address this, Stephen Moore, and you can find this in his books, and of course the other new book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States. And if you're dealing with some issues in your state legislature, there's a lot of great resources there. But there are also the cultural issues, and as Christians we recognize that certainly we want to help the poor, but one of the ways we can help them is to say, get married, don't have sex till you get married, don't have children out of wedlock. There are some really important moral and spiritual principles there that we want to apply as well. And some of you that are listening online that haven't had a chance to make your comments, will give you that opportunity in the second hour if you want to stay tuned. But we're, of course, having to come to a break. And let me again encourage you to get a couple of these resources. So if you would like to start a discussion among your friends, or maybe even write to your legislators about some of these issues, we have provided some of those. And the first one, of course, is the article, which is free of charge. We've posted it on our website. For many Americans, welfare has replaced work. And I've called it Welfare Has Replaced Work, just to simplify the title. And you can print it out. It's about 2 pages, and it's something that Stephen Moore has done, but he gives you a lot of the facts and figures. Then I also quoted a little more from something we haven't posted, but I'm going to have this in an upcoming commentary. So if you haven't signed up for my commentaries, it's available. And that is the work versus welfare trade-off. And so those are resources that either are on the website or will be shortly. So take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net. In the second hour today, we'll have a chance to talk about finances from a biblical point of view with Chuck Bentley. We'll be back right after this.
How has Point of View changed what you do? Dr. Rodney Hare.
When I heard Point of View explain about secular humanism, it drove us to really begin a school.
Liberty Christian School began with 5 students and now enrolls more than 1,300. And that all began because of listeners who support this program. As we approach the end of 2014, a generous donor is challenging you to match his $10,000 gift. Your gift of any size is doubled, and we only have until the end of the year to get this matched.
Without those of us that are able to really help substantially in giving sacrificially, Point of View will never be as strong as it could be. We cannot let anything happen to Point of View Radio.
Remember, your gift is doubled. Help transform tomorrow by giving today. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today as we continue our conversation about economics and poverty and welfare. First hour, we really looked at some of the economic issues. Now we're going to look at some of the cultural issues, and I know you're going to appreciate both hours, but especially as we have a chance now to talk with our good friend Chuck Bentley, who, of course, is the head of Crown Financial Ministries. He's the CEO, has traveled the world literally teaching biblical principles and also addressing this issue of poverty. He's the host, of course, of the daily national radio broadcast My Money Life, and of course is the executive producer of such things as God Provides Film Learning Experience, as well as the Crown Financial Money Map, and his book A Root of Riches is one that we've talked about before. He's a graduate of Baylor University, another one of those individuals who was student body president along with Ken Paxton and Jeff Leach and so many others we've had on the program, and graduated in that degree in business administration, has written quite a bit, and certainly we were going to point you to one of the articles we posted today, 4 Steps to End Poverty. Chuck, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Kirby, it is my pleasure to be with you, old friend. I just get a good feeling in my heart every time I hear the theme music. I love the program, and I have to tell you, Kirby, I've been rereading the updated version of Eugene Peterson's book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, and I truly think of what you and Marlon Maddox have done in Christian radio. It has been a long obedience in the same direction. So I'm really honored. Thank you for having me today.
Well, it is great to have you. Thank you for those kind words as well. In the first hour, we had Stephen Moore. We were kind of looking at the issue of poverty and welfare from an economic point of view, but he set us up very good, because at the end, he was talking about the fact that really there are 3 things you can do to avoid poverty, and this comes from William Galston, who was an advisor to Bill Clinton. The first is graduate from high school. Number 2, wait until 20 to have children. And number 3, wait until getting married to have children. Right. And he found that only 8% of the people who do those 3 things are poor. But interestingly enough, or you can put it the other way, if you do those 3 things, you have a 92% chance of staying above the poverty line. By contrast, though, a person who breaks just one of those rules has a 79% chance of ending up below the poverty line. And it gets us into what I'd like to talk about this hour, the kind of biblical, cultural reasons for poverty. And a lot of what you actually are going to be talking about comes from the book of Jeremiah. Now, we had your friend Raymond Harris on here the other day, and he was talking about all the biblical principles we can apply in business from Proverbs. I don't think most people would think about going to the book of Jeremiah to find some of those biblical principles, but you've done so.
Well, Kirby, I'm excited about it because most people have a compassion towards the poor. That we are naturally inclined to feel a level of empathy for those who are less fortunate. And I do, you do, your listeners do, and we all want to do something about it. But what we've tended to do about it is to maintain them at a little bit more comfortable level in their poverty. And that's what I think we're all frustrated with. We, as a friend of mine likes to say, we're really into poverty maintenance, and we're not into poverty alleviation. And I was responding to an article written by Peter Buffett. Now, Peter Buffett is Warren Buffett's son. He happens to be a famous composer. And he wrote an article in the New York Times criticizing what he called the charitable industrial complex. And he painted everybody who's in a not-for-profit trying to help the poor with an ugly brush. He basically said everybody's, nothing's working.
and we're not winning the battle on global poverty. And there was some truth to that. But what frustrated me was he went on to say, I think we need a new model, and he called for humanism. And I thought, Kirby,
here we go.
About the last thing we need is more humanism. You know, humanism is man's effort to help himself. And when you approach a problem from a humanistic standpoint, you tell the people with the problem to help themselves. Now, I'm not against people working and helping themselves, but I'm against the idea that those who are suffering are left on their own. You know, they need a Savior, and the Savior who came to the world gave us His principles for our own benefit. So he challenged us to come up with a new solution, and I had been reading Jeremiah 29, verse 11. Most people have it either memorized, and some even have it in a needle point hanging on the wall. You know which verse I'm talking about, Kirby?
Sure. Go for it.
Yeah. The Lord says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And what I found is that people believe that verse, and they sit around going, Lord, what is the plan? How are you going to prosper me? Where's my hope? Where's my future? Please send it. Please reveal it. Please show me, Lord. I need a plan. And it just struck me like lightning that the plan came in verses 5 through 11. That the plan was already there. And he was only emphasizing that he had just told them the plan, that he told them very specific practical steps. Now, I love what you opened in the earlier segment with. What a brilliant interview. And it's really true that there are practical economic steps to avoid poverty. And this is the one the Lord gave to the Israelites when they were exiles. Now, I love teaching this in a global context, Kirby, because you know why? People say, well, you're from America and you're in the West and you don't understand poverty and you don't know how bad it is. And I say, well, yeah, that's why I'm not using a Western perspective. I'm using a biblical perspective to the people who had nothing. The people who were exiles in Babylon, these were refugees. They had nothing, and this was the plan God gave them. And he listed it step by step by step. And I look forward to going through every one of those steps in Jeremiah, because here's my thesis, Kirby. If we as believers will embrace this plan, we can see people come out of chronic generational poverty. It can be alleviated. That's the hope in the future that I believe is promised in the Scripture, and it's a very practical plan.
Well, let me just, before we take a break, say to those of you that maybe have something to write with, when we come back, we're going to talk about the 4 steps to end poverty. It's really based on Jeremiah 29. If you have a Bible, pull out your Bible, and you can kind of follow along as well. And I want to say to those of you that are pastors or Bible fellowship or Sunday school leaders, you might want to write some of this down. This would be a great message. It would take people through a passage that culminates in a verse that everybody knows, but precedes it with some great insights, and I hope that you'll take the time to do so. And also, there's a link to that earlier article. It was in the New York Times by Peter Buffett. But one of those lines there is one that just kind of gave you ulcers. I'm not really calling for an end to capitalism. I'm calling for humanism. Wrong answer. So nevertheless, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll get into this. And again, a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have, even in our own country here, a welfare system that seems to have real problems. I quoted from the Cato Institute. 11 states, welfare pays more than the average pre-tax first-year wage for a teacher. 39 states, it pays more than the starting wage for a secretary. And in the 3 most generous states, a person on welfare can take home more money than an entry-level computer programmer. If you want less of something, tax it. If you want more of something, subsidize it. We've been subsidizing idleness and lack of dedication to very important principles. One of those is hard work and thrift, and certainly the work ethic. So we're going to come back and talk about steps to end poverty, not just in America, but around the world. Chuck Bentley is my guest. We'll be back with him, and then you, right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
You know, as we draw nearer to Christmas, I thought it might be good to reflect on the hymn, O Holy Night by John Dwight. O Holy Night, the stars are shining brightly. It is the night of the dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. Jesus came into the world to save us, and so we feel valuable and our souls feel its worth. Perhaps the most quoted verse in the Bible is John 3:16. It tells us that Jesus came because God so loved the world. He came so that our souls would feel their worth to God. This hymn also asks us to consider the fact that the King of Kings was born as a human infant and placed in a manger. He also experienced temptation and persecution. Ultimately, he died a horrible death on the cross. The King of Kings lay thus in lowly manger in all our trials, born to be our friend. He knows our need, to our weakness is no stranger. Behold your King, before him lowly bend. Isn't it amazing that there were some who were willing to worship him even while he was merely a babe in a manger? This hymn talks about how we should respond to one another in humility. Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. We no longer have slavery in this country, but many people are still enslaved to various forms of sin and need Jesus as their Savior. And we as believers are to model the humility that Jesus demonstrated when he stepped out of eternity into time and gave up his rights as God. This is a message we need not only at Christmas, but every day. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Chuck Bentley, and if you would like to join our conversation, I know there are a few of you waiting online. We'll get to those in just a few minutes. But again, we encourage you to join the conversation, but also find out a little bit more about Crown Financial Ministries. We have the link there. And we also have his article here today, 4 Steps to End Poverty, which will take you to the website, and I think you'll find it really helpful. So take the time to read these and maybe engage in the discussion. So Chuck, let's, if we can, kind of turn to Jeremiah 29 and see what precedes that famous verse. And the first one is, you say, step 1, a self-sustaining settlement. What does that entail?
Well, Jeremiah 29:5 says, build a house and settle down, plant a garden and eat from your own garden. Now, if we skip right over that, Kirby, we put ourselves back in ancient times and we think, how in the world is that relevant to us today? Well, I want you to help accentuate the philosophy behind this. It's a philosophy of personal responsibility. These are refugees. He didn't say move into government housing and live off of welfare. Mm-hmm. The Lord's plan was to absolutely abolish this idea of dependency upon the state. He said to the refugees, you build a house. He didn't say move into something that's provided for you. Build a house. You're going to be there a while, so you're going to need a place to live. Then plant a garden and eat from your own garden. Now, this pops the utopian bubble. This idea that we have a socialistic solution to a common garden, and everybody's going to eat from a common garden, that's a failed idea. It's a failed economic principle. So this is the advice that he gave them. Establish for yourself a place to live, and you build it. Secondly, have food security that you've provided from the labor of your own hands. And then thirdly, be in a position to provide for your own needs. And ringing in my ears was Daniel. You know, Daniel was taken captive in Babylon, and he was offered the government program. What was the government program? We'll feed you. You know what he said? No, thank you. I'll eat from my own food. Mm-hmm. And it was in a way a form of expression of his faith in God. God is my provider. He said, plant a garden and eat from my own garden. I'm going to live that way. And as we know, the rest of that story, Daniel was honored because of that very simple expression of reliance upon God. And I think that's what the Lord was saying to the refugees. If you'll do this my way, you'll see my hand move to take care of you. So build a house, settle down, plant a garden, and eat from your own garden. And here's what I see on a global basis, Kirby. We're going out around the world, and we're saying to people, oh, we'll come and do that for you. We'll come and take care of that need for you. I'm absolutely compassionate for people who cannot work, people who do not have the ability to do that and plant their own garden. Let's help them. But in 2 Thessalonians 3:10, it's very clear that those who are unwilling to work are disqualified from receiving charitable feeding programs. Now, that is one of the more controversial statements I could ever make.
Sure.
And Kirby, people don't like to hear that. But Paul said it himself, if you are unwilling to work, you should not eat. Why? Because hunger is a great motivator.
That's right.
It puts us to work. And the reason that the Lord wants us to work is not because it's punishment, not because we're under a curse and have to work, is because God himself was a worker. We are made in the image of God, and when we work, we're reflecting his glory to mankind. We're bringing benefit to others through the services and the products that we create. So it's good for our soul, it's good for an economy, and this very first principle changes the entire paradigm of the predominant school of thought to poverty solutions in America. It turns it upside down. And as I started to read through this, I began to realize, my goodness, we're going about this all wrong. We're trying to provide it for everyone through a common system, now today what I would consider a very socialistic system, versus saying we want to give assistance and training so that you can do that. And I've been in countries where there is no government housing. In fact, in Singapore, you have to buy your house that the government provides. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to just live there and have it underwritten. You actually have to buy it. Why? Because they want even the least of these in their culture to own their own home and to be responsible for taking care of it.
Well, and you take care of what you own, for sure. And it gets us back to this issue of cultural dependence. This culture of dependence right now is debilitating. You talked about the positive aspects of work, and we see this in the book of Genesis and all the way through the Bible. But when we allow people to degrade into idleness and they no longer have to take care of things because they do not own them, of course, you can see the disability that happens in this country and what has happened oftentimes when we try to go in and take over various cultures and not allow them to benefit from the hard work and the sweat of their own efforts.
Well, no doubt about it. And it really gets into step number 2. And I think there's a great linkage between step 2 that's listed in Jeremiah and some of the cultural problems we see today. If you don't mind, Kirby, I want to go into step 2.
Sure, a growing family, because that's an important one as well, and we find that in verse 6.
Yes, verse 6 says, marry and have sons and daughters. Can I just stop there, Kirby? This is the Lord himself advocating for his own design and his own idea. He was the originator of this idea that there'd be a man and a woman, and that they would marry, and that they would be fruitful and multiply. That was God's idea. And he said it is good for the economy to marry and to have children. Now, think about any argument to the contrary. Do you know what happens when there are not people? There's no economy.
That's right.
Herbie, it's the antithesis of an economy to have no children, to say, oh, well, we'll be better off without children. No, you won't. There's not an economy on the moon. because there's no people on the moon. There's no, they don't need goods and services. So to have a robust, growing macroeconomy where everybody is benefiting, it's good to marry. It's good to have sons and daughters. And I always point out, this is a statement of equality. The Lord loves girls and boys. And I was teaching this recently in China, and it literally brought tears to people's eyes, because there's a sense that, they don't want girls in China. They're going to have one child, and they only want that child to be a boy. And so there's about 20% more men than women in the current Chinese population. But when I pointed out that God loves girls and boys, and we need both of them for a growing economy, it was really very touching to them. We take this statement for granted. But if you look at the economics of it, Kirby, people actually have a higher net worth who are married. They don't have a lower net worth. And what we're seeing today is the idea that there's too many people on planet Earth, there's not enough food to go around, that God is a God who is unkind, he's a God of scarcity, and therefore we should not marry. It's going to be too expensive, children are going to be too expensive. We're seeing a lot of cultural problems around this idea of we're going to delay it or even forego marriage. Today in Denmark, 50% of the households consist of one person, Kirby. Not two people. 50% in Denmark are a one-person household.
Wow.
And they're considered a family unit. And so if we buy into this philosophy that marriage isn't good, we don't need to be married, we can just cohabitate, we can have children and have those subsidized by the government, essentially what we're doing is we're looking at government as our father. Government becomes head of household. And everything that the government does is in response to being the father of the home. In this passage in Jeremiah 29:6, the Lord is saying, I will be your father. I'm your heavenly father. I'll be your provider. Now you do what I've asked you to do. Get married. Be faithful in that marriage. And be fruitful. Have sons and daughters. He goes on to say, seek husbands and wives for your sons and daughters. Increase. Do not decrease.
Very good. Let me jump in real quick because we have to take one of those mandatory breaks because there's more to cover here. And certainly at a time when we see these declining birth rates in some of these modern industrialized countries, that's certainly an issue. And we'll continue that conversation. Chuck Bentley with us, and we'll take some of your phone calls as we go along the way. Again, this is an article that I certainly want to put in your hands, and it's available just free of charge. Just download it from the website. 4 Steps to End Poverty. And for those of you taking notes, we've talked about step 1, which is on Verse 5, that is a self-sustaining settlement. And then step 2, a growing family. That comes from verse 6. We have more to cover, and we will do so in the second half hour. But if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to find some of the resources that we are making available, they're available at our website, pointofview.net. You can also, of course, click through the picture there of Chuck Bentley and find your way to Crown Financial Ministries, a great ministry I commend to you. And we'll continue our conversation with Chuck Bentley and you right after this.
C.S. Lewis once wrote that there is no such thing as an ordinary person. Every one of us will live forever, either in darkness or in glory. Point of View deals with eternal things, applying God's truth to all of life for the good of those made in the Creator's image. God has used Point of View to inspire all kinds of people, from congressmen to attorneys, school administrators, police officers, doctors, maintenance men, everything in between. One generous donor right now is challenging you to match his gift of $10,000. And maybe you can give $30 or $100. Help us match that gift before the end of this year. God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. This is a critical time to give. Your gift will be doubled any size. And we only have until the end of the year to get this matched. Please give online at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Chuck Bentley with us, and as we are talking about 4 steps to end poverty, we've talked about the first one, that is a self-sustaining settlement, the second one, a growing family. But Chuck, let's talk about that for just a minute, because we do live in this culture right now, and we almost have to be counterculture as Christians, because there is such an emphasis upon the fact that we have too many people, we have limited resources, and I think that's one of the reasons why you see the declining fertility rates around the world. Now, you wouldn't notice that if you look at a typical church nursery, but nevertheless, certainly in the secular world, there is this kind of idea that people are bad for the environment, people are bad for the economy. Actually, Chuck, just the opposite. People are good. They're arrows in the quiver. They are a gift from God, and they're something that we should encourage, and that's certainly what God does in Jeremiah 6, chapter 29, verse 6, because the emphasis there is upon seeking husbands and wives and sons and daughters. It's really emphasizing this idea of family.
You know, Kirby, I think it's a major point, and it's one that we can't overemphasize today because it's so ingrained in our head that marriage is expensive, children are expensive, and maybe there's not going to be enough to go around. In Paul Ehrlich's 1970 book called The Population Bomb, he basically put forth the scarcity mentality that, we were going to run out of food, the world was going to run out of resources, and it was going to just be horrible. It was this doomsday apocalyptic scenario that planet Earth could not sustain too many people. And that book should be classified as fiction. It's never been true, and we're not running out of anything. And as people increase, as the population increase, interestingly enough, the resources of the world have increased because God's people, as stewards, multiply and increase resources. But even in spite of that, birth rates are now falling in most of the developed world. What's interesting, Kirby, is that Gallup did a survey last year, and they asked, why are you delaying marriage? Why are you postponing having more children? And the number one reason was the lack of money, and the number two reason was the fear of the economy. But these birth rates are falling in the richest nations on earth. The United States, China, Japan, Germany, Italy, and nearly every European country have declining birth rates. Right now, there are more people in Japan more adults who wear diapers than there are babies. Japan is in danger of aging out if they don't start having more babies. And even in Russia, where the birth rate has plunged, Putin announced to go home, and they have a national procreation holiday. And I'm not making that up.
I know. It makes you smile, but it is true. That's right.
But what we're seeing is any time we have a disregard for God's word and for his advice, we suffer. We're doing the wrong thing. And we have people going around the world telling, all these developing countries, just stop having babies. No, actually, they're the ones who are going to have the strongest economies in the future. Right now, most of the developed world has what's called an aging out population, where there are more seniors than there are young ones coming in. And the young ones coming in, they're the ones who pay the taxes. They're the ones who, help support the economy. They pay for the pensions and the health care for the elderly. And if you don't have that, then you're going to have a major economic crisis because of the failure to be fruitful and multiply. And it's this false philosophy, and we're not taking it seriously enough. I tell mothers all the time, you are an economic engine. You're the backbone of the economy. Raising a family, having children, raising godly children. And the school, I was listening to the person who's put up the matching gift challenge, or an ad about the school who was impacted through listening to Point of View and started the school to educate our young people in a Christian worldview. This is what's needed. This is the grassroots solution that will change the future of this country. And so I take this advice from Jeremiah, and I say, why don't we take it seriously? You see, if we listen to Buffett's advice that we need more humanism, His father's giving billions of dollars to fund abortions.
Yes.
That's not going to create a robust economy. That's not the path out of poverty. The path out of poverty is to grow and have more people who are capable of working and being productive citizens.
Well said. Again, 4 steps to end poverty. Chuck Bentley with us. And step 1, of course, a self-sustaining settlement. That's based on verse 5. Step 2, a growing family. That's based on verse 6. Now we'll move to verse 7. Step 3, a solution-oriented enterprise. Chuck, what does that mean?
Well, the Lord said, seek the peace and prosperity into the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray for it, for if it prospers, you too will prosper. Now, this verse turns the prosperity gospel upside down. And the prosperity gospel is that I can name it or claim it, I can demand it of God, and that God is obligated, if I ask him, to cause me to financially prosper and to become wealthy. And this verse undoes all of that. We're to seek the peace, first of all, through peaceful means, not through violence or intimidation or survival of the fittest or through war, as you see in many cultures of the world where people try to dominate others, but through peaceful means. We're to seek to prosper those into the city where we live, a local economy based upon peace where our goal and our heart attitude is not my personal prosperity, but the prosperity of others. Now, Kirby, I like to say this is the best business advice the Lord ever gave in the Bible. If what you do, your product or your service, helps other people prosper, if it's a blessing to them, you will have a thriving, sustainable enterprise. And that's how you will be provided for. And when enough people do that, you have a growing economy. You see, an economy is nothing more than a collection of the gifts and talents and the worldview of the people in that local community. And if that worldview is based on hatred and conflict, there'll never be a growing economy because there's no peace. Peace must come first. Peace settles everyone down. Peace allows us to trade and to barter and to build our houses. So we must be peace-seeking people, and we must have this attitude that others should prosper and that my prosperity is dependent upon that. Because if we invert that and say, I'm only going to prosper, I'm only going to live for my own personal prosperity, then we have unleashed coveting and greed and selfishness and a destructive attitude that doesn't allow for a meritocracy to flourish. So this is the hard attitude of a growing economy. And what we're in danger of right now is unleashing this agenda and this worldview that others should not prosper, that we should take from them through the Robin Hood plan and distribute to others who have not worked. But this is a call to our own personal responsibility to be productive and help others to prosper in a servant's attitude. That way, that's my prosperity will come from my ability to help others.
You know, Chuck, this is another example of where we need to be sort of counterculture, because if you think about that survival of the fittest mentality, sort of the social Darwinism, which has certainly reared its ugly head in the past and may again, and what I've got is mine and you have to go get yours, and we have this kind of selfish attitude. That is certainly not a biblical attitude, and it's certainly one where we're going to have to not only train ourselves, but especially our children and grandchildren to be willing to be other-centered and altruistic. And in this society right now, that isn't necessarily the lesson that we hear every day.
Well, so true, Kirby. You know, the 10th commandment is thou shalt not covet anything that your neighbor has. And I think that commandment applies to the government. The government shouldn't covet the things that have been produced by the hard work of its citizens. That's a covetousness that will destroy an economy. God never set up socialism in the Bible. He never set up the Robin Hood plan. In fact, Kirby, I was teaching the parable of the talents in Africa about 6 months ago, and I went through the last there was a 5 talent, 2 talent, and 1 talent. I say it's the rich, the middle class, and the poor. And I said, who did God take the talents from, the rich or the poor? And it got quiet in the room. I said, God actually did the opposite of what you thought. He took from the poor and he gave to the wealthy. And why did he do that? Because the wealthy had been faithful steward. And he entrusted, it wasn't based on his financial status, it was based on his faithfulness. And you too can be faithful, and no one is excused from being faithful. Even the poor are not excused. You're to be faithful with one talent if that's what God has entrusted to you. And so it turns the Robin Hood plan upside down. Socialism is not God's plan. And when you see that he's looking for people who will be faithful to him, to be good stewards, to be productive, that's where an economy grows. And I actually said to this group I was speaking to, you have more resources than are in America. You have the resources. Let's learn to be faithful with them.
We'll take a break and talk about the step 4 right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back with Chuck Bentley for a few more minutes. 4 steps to end poverty. We've talked about step 1, a self-sustaining settlement based upon verse 5. Step 2, a growing family based upon verse 6. And step 3, a solution-oriented enterprise based upon verse 7. The last one, step 4, undivided worshipers, and that we can find in verses 8 and 9. Chuck, what would you share about that?
Well, the exiles were given this advice: do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. So, Kirby, in every culture, there are diviners and false prophets. There's deceivers. And they deceive us about economic philosophies. We had a very prestigious member of the U.S. government say several years ago that that Planned Parenthood was good for the economy. And the idea was that fewer children are good for the economy, and it's absolutely a deception. That is not true at any level. And yet we see in our country people with economic deception and people who are listening to God's Word. Maybe they're sitting in church and saying they're followers of Christ, and yet going out and embracing the philosophies of the world. And anytime there's syncretism, anytime there's a half-hearted embracing of God's truth, you don't see the growth and the change that comes when we have the transformation according to Romans 12:1 and 2, when our hearts and our minds are absolutely changed, when we die to humanism, we've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Now we live for God, and we live for His purposes. And the countries historically that have had a Christian worldview have had the greatest, fastest, and most sustained economic growth and development of any nations on earth. So from a macro view and also from a micro view that you talked about in the earlier program, Kirby, God's truth and God's principles are the basis for all good economic sustainable growth. And my thesis in the article, and the reason I'm so passionate about this, is I think if we Christians at the grassroots level will embrace this teaching and live it out in our own lives, and as you called for pastors and other teachers to get their notepad out and listen to this program, if we will spread this word that we need to do things God's way and not our own way and not blend it with the philosophies of the world, I think we'll see a massive transformation. I think there's hope for the future of this country. I think there's hope for any nation who will say, I want to follow God's ways. I'm going to reject the false teaching. I'm not going to try to blend it. I'm not going to try to have one foot in man's philosophy and one foot in God's truth. I'm going to accept that God's Word is the authoritative plan for my life, and I'm going to live it out. I think that's where the solution lies, Kirby, and I think that's what you're encouraging people to do every single day. And the reason that I'm so passionate about sharing this with people is I think that hope and a future that we're longing for is laid before us. God said, this is the plan. Now go and live the plan.
Very good. Let's take some phone calls. And again, if you want to get more information, we've posted 4 steps to end poverty and also a link to Crown Financial Ministries. Cliff in New Mexico, what would you like to share with our audience today?
Well, Kirby, it's great listening to you. I listen to you every day here in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And everything he's saying is right on because I'm an assistant pastor of a church in Las Cruces. And we drive down an hour back and forth for 2 services. And but the thing is, I'm blind and my wife drives. And I've been really going through a stress thing because I graduated from automotive school last year in 2013. And I've been all over social media this year in June of 16th to the 20th. And if you look me up on the blind mechanic Clifford Alderson, it's on there all over. I've been on radio, TV, and everything. Gretchen Carlson with a real story. And I have been, it has been frustrating to find a job and getting people to know who you are. And it's not, it's not about just an inspirational story. It's about the other side. The man's looking for a job in this country.
Right. You don't want to be dependent. You want to certainly support your family. And first of all, I commend you for all that you've done. You've gone far beyond what most people would. They might just have a pity party and say, well, I'm blind. There's nothing else I can do. Go ahead. Right.
And I have a daughter that's legally blind. She's 16, and she would like to see her dad working. And I've been crying the whole time I've been on your radio station for the past since, I think, 12 o'clock here. It's the time I got on. And because everything has been said is true. Our country is at the wayside, and a lot of people are at hope's ends. And they thought this story would be inspirational to those who need it. But, look at on the other side of that, there's people looking for jobs that are disabled, that can't walk or listen or hear. But they're out there going to college and getting these degrees. But who's to give them the chance to go out and prove it that they could help their families and go to church and put in the agape box and, help radio stations like yours and your show. And without it, and so many churches are struggling within the financial area because people are out of work, and we're seeing a change.
Let me go to Chuck real quickly because I only have a few minutes here. But first of all, I think for those that are really disabled, I mean, there is a place for the church. And even, of course, we've talked about what we might do through the government. I think the church is the primary vehicle to reach out and help people. But also, Cliff's just saying, look, I don't want pity. I'm glad to be an inspiration to other people, but I'd like to be fully and gainfully employed and support my family. Any thoughts, Chuck?
Well, first of all, Cliff, God bless you. Thank you for calling, and my heart goes out to you. I appreciate the courage to serve the Lord and to advance His truth. And let me just encourage you, brother, what may seem like your greatest weakness and your greatest obstacle right now, I think God can turn into a wonderful asset. I'm friends with a man named Nick Vujicic who wrote a book called Life Without Limits. And I remember the first time I met him about 7 years ago, and this was before he became world famous. And God just freed him up to recognize that He had given him a gift to encourage others that had some physical limitations. And don't let Satan convince you that you're not capable. Don't let him convince you that there's not hope for you. And I'll be praying for you. And if our ministry can do anything for you, Cliff, I'm standing by, ready to help and to be an encouragement to you in any way we can.
I might just encourage our listeners to be praying for Cliff as well. And let's talk about, since we only have a minute or two left, crown.org is a great resource for people to learn what their abilities are to apply biblical principles of finances. And so, Chuck, just real quickly, what can people find when they land at Crown Financial?
Well, they can find a great deal for helping them with their personal finances, whether it's budgeting, getting out of debt, learning to be a faithful steward, paying off the Christmas expenses. They can also learn about their job and career, their unique design through our Career Direct profile. That's what I was thinking about for Cliff specifically. And also we have an outreach to business leaders with Larry's classic work called Business by the Book. And we're standing by, ready to help folks. Kirby, as you know, we work at the grassroots level. I talked about macroeconomics today, but the world's going to change when our hearts are changed and when we're changed on a personal level. And that's what I'm hoping we can do and help anybody that's listening that wants to start off the new year doing their finances God's way. I want to be there for them at crown.org. But I also want to say to your listeners, Kirby, this opportunity to double their gift at year end is so important. I just can't imagine the United States without programs like Point of View to proclaim the good news, to point out the need for the issues to be addressed. I so appreciate the work you're doing, Kirby, and I want to encourage your listeners. I know you didn't ask me to do it, but I want to encourage them to support you this year end at pointofview.net.
Chuck Bentley, and again, Crown Financial. That's all we have for today. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
How has Point of View changed what you do? Dr. Rodney Hare.
When I heard Point of View explain about secular humanism, it drove us to really begin a school.
Liberty Christian School began with 5 students and now enrolls more than 1,300. And that all began because of listeners who support this program. As we approach the end of 2014, a generous donor is challenging you to match his $10,000 gift. Your gift of any size is doubled, and we only have until the end of the year to get this matched.
Without those of us that are able to really help substantially in giving sacrificially, Point of View will never be as strong as it could be. We cannot let anything happen to Point of View Radio.
Remember, your gift is doubled. Help transform tomorrow by giving today. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for